I'm going to do a share screen real quick.
And as Adam is loading that up, we have another question that folks can respond to or certainly keep in mind is, how do you all envision the ideal situation, one that does not displace residents? What's an ideal scenario as communities are engaging culture and identity in these transitional periods?
I think the ideal situation is people from the same community need to be the ones buying the property and redeveloping. How do we get, our youth to that point? I guess it's through mentorship, through education, through resources. But I think to solve that problem is we need more people from the community buying land.
Well, I think there's, other options is really to use the land trust model as a way for the community or for a community development corporation to actually purchase land and then hold on to it and develop it for the community instead of selling it. Now, I'd be interested to hear from Sela about, the amount of displacement that actually has happened, because I think one of the things where Walker's Point was fortunate in terms of adding, I think we've added like 400 or 500 units of housing in the last 15 years. And I think one of the reasons it happened without a lot of displacement, to how I understand it, is that a lot of these were empty warehouses that ended up being converted instead of being in the residential single duplex family housing neighborhoods. So, I know there's issues around, being able to pay increasing property taxes, et cetera. But the physical displacement has been, I think, relatively small. Would you agree or not?
I think it really hinges on which metrics we're using to define that, and especially how we're defining, the boundaries of the neighborhood. But I think that, when, I hear this a lot of like, is it really displacement when, it was like empty buildings or, it was unused land? I think that viewing it that way really simplifies a very complex issue of just how housing districting happened that had very much, racist practices, that had, it wasn't an equitable way of even zoning, the areas that people would live in. So, when we talk about economic empowerment, obviously owning land, owning homes, that's wealth that can be generational because you can pass that on to your family, your children. The fact is that we haven't created the conditions for that to happen, specifically, in the families that had been, in the Walker's Point neighborhood. So for us to say and simplify it, that it's just about, a single issue of we just need to do this, buy more houses. I think it's really, not acknowledging the role that these historic systems of oppression have had, with just the ability to even purchase a home. So I think that there's a lot of work that needs to be done around housing, security, and especially done through the lens of equity. So I know you, Ursula, you mentioned that there's a lot of, buildings and apartments that have been built in that area. And, just like the question that you mentioned of well, what are the prices for that? And, when we're looking at tax increases for property. So it's all these multiple systems that I think even make it and create greater barriers for folks to be able to really be the ones that are finding economic empowerment. And I think that's what we're all interested in finding for folks, in the neighborhood.
I just want to get into real quick these images. So Marcela, this is a little bit of the history of the systems you're talking about. When the first Mexican families came, the first large influx of Mexican families came to Milwaukee in about 1922, 1923, so almost 100 years ago. They were recruited by the Pfister and Vogel Tannery, Jesus, where you mentioned your father worked. This is after World War I, when the Pfister and Vogel and other tanneries in Milwaukee had a windfall from all the boots they were producing, all the military goods they were making. And Pfister and Vogel made a ton of money. yet did not improve labor conditions, pay, safety for their workers. These were predominantly Eastern European, Central European guys. They went on strike. Pfister and Vogel said, if you guys don't want a job, we'll go find someone who does. They recruited guys coming up from Mexico looking for work, probably from places very similar to Wisconsin in Mexico, right? So folks from the Central Highlands of Mexico, they came up here to work at Pfister and Vogel, but they were never told that they were scabs. So the fact that they were breaking a strike line was a surprise to them when they arrived. So talk about sowing the seeds of racial division. And if you with a little analysis, those Eastern European guys, I'm sure there was a racial component to it, but a lot of that, I mean, they wouldn't like anyone who broke the strike line. Pfister and Vogel really orchestrated a kind of like racial discord. When you have the first Mexican guys stepping foot in the Walker's Point neighborhood, they're already hated by residents there, and that was really orchestrated by those industrialists. I'm going to go real quick. So speaking of the systems, as Marcelo was just describing, this is a map. This is a great tool called Mapping Inequality, Redlining in New Deal America. It basically just collects a bunch of the redlining maps from around the country. Actually, let's just, if we want to talk about the North claiming that we're not racist, look at where redlining tends to center itself. Let's go to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Let's zoom in a little bit.
And as Adam is getting the image for us, the question of land utility runs the historical gamut from arguments associated with colonialism and settler colonialism all the way up through the contemporary moment in this very ruggedly capitalistic lens and frame. Are you using the land the way we determine it ought to be used? And are you using the urban landscape to maximize profit in very limited ways that oftentimes ignores the rich cultural underpinnings of neighborhoods and landscapes?
So this is a redlining map. This tool is so great. It shows us area by grade, best, still desirable, definitely declining, hazardous. These are federal documents. That's important to point out. This isn't a troll on Reddit or 4chan saying these neighborhoods are messed up. This is literally our federal government doing this. Let's just click on this one. This is where Walnut Street is. This is made in 1937. You can read the remarks there. This is the Negro and slum area of Milwaukee. It is old and very ragged. Besides the colored people, a large number of lower type Jews are moving into the section. We got a twofer of racism there in that description. And let's move down here. Kind of the area we're talking about. Let's look at the scan. And this is just look, check out the maps from October 1st, 1937, favorable influences, detrimental influences, Mexicans coming into northeast corner. And if you go down for the clarifying remarks, there's a bunch of stats in here, goes on about Polish folks, and then at the very end, it just tacks on Mexicans encroaching in the northeast. So I wanted to share this with you because this is a federal document. And as Marcelo was I just wanted to show this to reinforce some of what Marcelo was saying. This basically made it impossible for those families who moved to Pfister and Vogel to take out bank loans to buy homes, to invest in land, to build generational wealth. Oftentimes, redlining meant you couldn't even have a savings account. You couldn't have insurance. So I think, that those documents, I just wanted to share those a little bit with you all. What do you guys think after seeing these, sort of the story of the first large group of Mexicans coming to Walker's Point, and then these redlining maps? I know there's a lot there.
I don't even know how to respond. I mean, we're kind of dealing with this in every part of our city. I think it certainly shows the history, but I think what is probably more important is what do we do going forward? And I know in Walker's Point, I mean, the last big study that was done was the transit-oriented development study, which completed in 2018 or 19. So it's pretty recent. And I'm just kind of curious of, Marcella, of how you feel about that study and the respective inclusiveness, how that development team went around or about creating those plans and how the community feels about some of those development strategies. Because that is a life document that's in force, you know, that will kind of shape the next 10 years.
Right. I mean, I think, you know, it goes back to, you know, the idea of, you know, just like the interconnectedness of a lot of the issues. When we talk about housing issues, when we talk about, you know, issues of, you know, building generational wealth, you know, transportation is a big thing that we deal as a city. So I know that, you know, the zip code where Walker's Point neighborhood is, has a very high ridership percentage that use public transit system. So just looking at, you know, what that looks like. I mean, we have the getting ready for what is that? The little train thing that's coming in sometime?
Streetcar.
The streetcar. And just, you know, just those questions. I just keep going back to the questions of like our role as really being critical. You know, there are studies that have been done, you know, take a look at that. You know, I think I always take those with a grain of salt because obviously, you know, any study is not perfect. So, you know, just take that information, you know, analyze it, take a look at, you know, the history of the folks that, you know, how they're engaging with communities that are leading these studies, kind of how those are communicated, and most importantly, how that information has been made available to, you know, the broader community. I think those are the things that I look at the most.
And, you know, the last images I'll share with you all is almost like a parable on what Marcella was just describing, which is just a little background here. This is the building on North Avenue, right on I-43, that later became, in 1984, this mural. I wanted to show this because I actually like this mural a lot, but that was the mural before Reynaldo Hernandez painted one of his first major murals in Milwaukee. He's painted since then over 100 murals in Milwaukee and around the country. So Reynaldo's in the coat here in the middle. In 1993, he painted this mural. He was commissioned by Richard Houlihan of the Esperanza Unida, and really his motivation, what they said, was paint a mural representing the diversity, the hopes, the aspirations, the challenges of the South Side. This is what he came up with. I would say definitely the most recognizable mural in the city. It was damaged it was painted in 1993 or created in 1993, damaged in 1999 and restored. And then this happened. So the image you saw right here of Reynaldo, this was in the beginning of March of 2016. This was the end of the month, 2016. So the group that bought this building to redevelop it into apartments had struck a deal with DCD, Department of City Development, and Reynaldo to restore the mural, but they also needed to punch some windows in it. So Reynaldo was actually contracted to do this restoration, but they never informed anyone in the neighborhood or Reynaldo of the timeline. So this is to your point, Marcella, of how you do and don't build trust. Someone posted this on Facebook. I think it literally got shared about 100,000 times because folks are really worried. You know, the resounding comment people saying, what are they doing to our mural? And I think that kind of cuts into where people were. I actually called Reynaldo that day to say, hey, Reynaldo, what's going on? And he said, you know, they contracted me to restore it and I'm excited to do it, but they never told me the timeline of when they'd be taking it down. So I think this real estate company or these developers, they did eventually restore it. And it is, I would say, like, it looks good. But I think it just speaks to sort of the tension, the anxieties folks were feeling in the community. You guys want to share a little bit? I mean, that almost seems like a parable to describe a lot of what was being discussed here, but this actually all happened in the span of a couple weeks in April 2016.
Well, to me, you know, that's a art piece that I see every day, you know, as I'm like going to work, you know, highway. It's very visible from many parts in the city. So I think to me, it's really, you know, what it symbolizes of just the, I don't know, kind of like the commodity that these symbols have for a certain type of people. So when we analyze, the, developers and kind of their vested interest and changing the function of this building, they were also, messing with something that was very much a symbol of, community. So when we're looking at how, artwork, art and culture kind of mix in these conversations of development, we're looking at, who is able to make the decisions of what stays up for how long and how it looks like. And I think it was just a reminder for a lot of us of just how not in power we are for this decision. So I think it was just like a in-your-face example of how, we're operating in these systems that we have no control over. And it was just very frustrating for many of us. And, I don't know, I look at those images and it puts me in a place of anger and anxiety, because that's what I was experiencing. And I still kind of do that when I'm passing by that, because it just reminds me of this like wound that was left there and, sort of somewhat repaired.